Okay, so we'll get underway. My name is Alan Hurlbert. I'm a professor of biology at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today to learn about this citizen science project, Caterpillars Count. We are an official part of Purdue University's annual Bug Bowl today. So if you found us through the Bug Bowl links, welcome. We're happy to be associated with Bug Bowl. So as I mentioned to a few folks who signed on a little bit earlier, on this home screen here that I'm sharing, there's a URL, a tiny URL at the bottom. So that just has a link to both sort of a summary of what we're going to cover today, but also it's sort of a link to links. So it'll help you find a lot of the resources that I'm going to be discussing as part of this project. And of course, all of the resources are available on our website, and you'll see the link to that repeatedly throughout the talk today. But sometimes it can be difficult to remember where on the website it was somewhere. So this Google Doc is hopefully just an additionally useful way to find that information. So what we're going to try to do today is basically give you some background for why this project exists, what our scientific goals are with the project, and what participation looks like. How you participate, how you create a site, how much time and effort it takes, what you need to know, what specifically you end up doing. And we'll also give a little window into what you can do with the data that you've collected or the data that other folks have collected as a part of this project as well. Okay, I should mention, so my graduate student Grace is on the line and manning the chat box. So you should feel free, if you have questions at any point during the presentation, go ahead and type them into the chat, and she can either answer that for you or get my attention, and we can pause and discuss some of the things that occur to you as we're going. The way, somehow the nature of this topic is that there's no one logical way to present all of the information without you having all kinds of questions about things I haven't gotten to come up. So it's just totally fine for you to raise those questions as they occur to you. So the general context and motivation for why this Caterpillars Count project exists is it's in the context of thinking about global change. And of course, we know climate change is an important factor going on in many parts of the world. In some parts, that climate change is more extreme than in other parts. We know there's also urbanization and land cover change, deforestation. And so generally, as an ecologist, I'm interested in, what are the broader consequences of these kinds of global changes for ecosystems, for organisms, for living things. And insects in particular are a group that scientists have been worried about for several years now. This was a very big headline a couple years ago. The insect apocalypse is here. There have been, since that article, there have been a number of high-profile papers coming out describing declines in various groups of insects or arthropods from different parts of the world. We still don't really have a sense of how general, how widespread these insect declines are. We don't know if it really is an insect apocalypse. We simply don't have enough long-term monitoring information to be able to make that assessment. But what we do know is we've seen a number of alarming studies. And so that really makes us want to find out as much as we can about what's our current baseline. If for places where we've never tried monitoring insects and bugs before, then it's really imperative to create a baseline for, well, okay, what does it look like right now in terms of how many bugs are out there in our yards and parks and forests. And ideally, we want to be able to monitor those into the future so that we can keep track of any alarming trends and better understand where insects are decreasing more so than others. But this is just another example of some published studies just showing, again, this is sort of a global analysis. They kind of take information from lots of different studies across the board, and relative to how things stood in 1970 for different insect groups, they concluded that, yeah, broadly, lots of different insect groups are declining, some groups more than others. So this is what we'd like to get a handle on. This is one piece of what we'd like to get a handle on. The second piece, in addition to just thinking about, are insects stable, are they decreasing, are they increasing? Another way that climate change in particular might impact insects, which are cold-blooded organisms. Obviously, they depend very closely on temperature. So if we think about the seasonal timing of life events, spring and temperate zones. So in North Carolina, I would say just this week, we're starting to look like this picture all the way on the right. Just 2 weeks ago, we were very much this picture in the middle here. So hopefully wherever you are in North America, you're on your way to something like that rightmost picture. But of course, so trees are responding to increases in temperature, and that's the reason why they leaf out in the spring. And of course, trees are a very important source of food for all kinds of insects. Insect herbivores that eat the foliage itself, or that tap into, the stems and suck the juices of those plants, but also just as a home, a habitat for all kinds of other insects and arthropods that maybe aren't utilizing the plant itself directly. But so if we think specifically about herbivores, like caterpillars, well, obviously it does them no good to come out in most cases before trees leaf out. And if they wait too long until after a tree is leafed out, well, that tree starts pumping into its leaves all kinds of nasty secondary compounds, chemicals that make the leaf less tasty for an insect. So if you're an insect herbivore, really the best time to be munching on these leaves is kind of that period, that month or so right after green up. Now, what's happening with climate change, right? So if under climate change, you might imagine that in a warmer spring, these trees start leafing out a little bit earlier. And then as a consequence, the insects that live on those trees, the insects that eat the leaves on those trees, might start coming out earlier under warmer climates as well. And so this is another open question. How much are insects responding to climate change by shifting the seasonal timing, or phenology is another word we use to describe that seasonal timing. So we have these two questions. Are insects declining? Where and by how much? Are insects shifting their seasonal timing? And this second question in particular, well, both of these questions are super important, not just from the perspective of understanding the insects themselves, but for understanding an entire ecosystem, understanding other organisms that depend on those insects. So full disclosure, I am not a bug person, I'm a bird person. And here's an example of a bird. This is an indigo bunting. And this animation is showing you where the indigo bunting occurs different weeks of the year. So you can see it winters down in Central America. And right around now, I've seen reports. I haven't seen my first indigo bunting yet this year, but I've seen reports of other people in North Carolina that have seen indigo bunting. So it's right about now they're coming through. So why do these migratory songbirds migrate in the first place? Guess what? It comes back to these bugs, right? This big seasonal pulse of insects that we're about to get in this late spring and early summer, that's the reason these birds are migrating northwards in the first place. So you might think of birds as migrating south to avoid winter, but really birds, the most important thing they can do in their life is reproduce. And in order to be successful at reproduction, you need to have a lot of food around when you're trying to reproduce. So these birds have evolved to take advantage of this big seasonal pulse in insects. And so that's why they migrate north. They're going to migrate north. They're going to, find a mate, build a nest, lay eggs, incubate those eggs. And when those eggs hatch, they need there to be a lot of caterpillars and beetles and flies and other kinds of insects to successfully raise their young. But imagine that you're an indigo bunting and you're wintering down in Central America, and spring in North Carolina has been advancing. Spring has been coming a little bit earlier every year because of warming. Well, in Central America, as a bird, you may not realize that. So you may migrate northward at the time that always kind of worked well for generations for you. But if that's the case, it could be that those insects have already kind of emerged and peaked, and they're already on kind of a downhill slope by the time you have young in the nest that you can feed. So that's one reason that we started this citizen science project, is we really wanted to understand what the relationship is between how insects are responding to climate change in terms of that seasonal availability, and how birds are responding to climate change in terms of how much they're actually shifting the timing of their migration and arrival. Now, this animation I showed you for this indigo bunting, this comes from citizen scientist bird observations that were submitted to the project eBird, you may have heard about. Millions and millions of observations per month about birds from all over the world are getting submitted to eBird, and it's allowing scientists to get a very detailed understanding of where different bird species are, when they're moving. But there's no comparable citizen science project that gives us a high-level overview. Oh, sorry, here's my tribute to the bird watchers who are contributing this information. But we don't have a parallel project until now. That's what motivated this Caterpillars Count project, that's trying at a very large spatial scale, continental scale, even global scale. I don't know if anyone's tuning in from another continent, but you can certainly participate in this project from any continent. And the idea is we want to get a sense of how much bird food is out there. So we're looking at woody vegetation. This project is focusing on conducting surveys on woody vegetation. That means trees and shrubs. And basically we want to inspect a lot of branches. We have a free mobile app for submitting that data. We have some training resources. We have some integration with iNaturalist I'll talk about later today. If you participate, well, whether or not you participate, you can explore all of the project data at our website. We have some data visualization tools. This project works really well at nature centers and schools. I'll talk about that, but also for people that are just very interested in bugs, and I know some of you are out there, you can do this project in your backyard, assuming you have the right vegetation for it as well. For those who are involved in either formal or informal education, we have a number of learning activities and things like that are linked to the website. I'll hopefully have a chance to highlight a few of those at the end today. So that's kind of just a very high level overview of some of the pieces that we'll go through. But I think the first part to really understand in thinking about, is this a project that I want to get involved in? You have to understand sort of the granular level of, what's the minimum level of participation you can do, because that minimum level is a bit higher than other projects. For example, iNaturalist, you could go out and snap one photo of one bug and submit it to iNaturalist, and it's done, and you have participated in iNaturalist. That's a very low bar, and there's lots of good reasons or lots of advantages to having a project with a very low bar like this. This project is a little bit different. We have a little bit higher bar for participation, in part because we're really trying to get information that we can use for a very specific scientific question. And that boils down to, on a particular date, in a particular area, what's the average amount of bird food that was there? So I'll get more into the nature of these survey trees or survey branches in a moment. But the granular unit of contribution is a survey branch or a survey tree. I'm using those things interchangeably here. But you need to, if you want to participate, you set up a site, and that site must have at a minimum 10 survey branches. And they're arranged in groups of 5. So here you can see in this cartoon has 30 survey branches, right? So 6 groups of 5 branches each. And we also refer to these groups as a circle, in part because, loosely, depending on how you lay them out, of course, we kind of imagine that we have a central survey branch and then 4 satellite branches, and those constitute a circle or a group of 5 together. So I'm gonna talk through what this might look like if you're at a nature center or a school where you have potentially many visitors who visit your location and would be interested in getting involved in a citizen science project. For those kinds of sites, they can really do a divide and conquer approach. That is, if you get 5 or 10 volunteers who are visiting your nature center as part of a citizen science walk on Saturdays, well, they could each do 1 or 2 survey branches, right? And that's not very much time on their part, and yet you can accomplish a lot. Whereas if you're interested in doing this just in your own backyard and it's just going to be you, then you might not be able to cover as many survey branches, right? So I will say, I'll go over this again in more detail in a few minutes, but the total number of survey branches that you set up, aside from there being a minimum of 10, is up to you. So it has to be a multiple of 5, but 10, 15, 20, we have some sites that have 80 or 100 survey branches where they're, especially when it's a university or something that is doing this with their introductory classes, maybe they want to set up a large number of survey branches across campus or something. Okay, so that's the first piece, is you have to decide, all right, how many survey branches can I do? And probably the best for time budgeting, at least to start, I would allocate roughly 5 minutes a survey branch. So if you're going to do, if you're a nature center and you set up 30, then 5 times 30 is 150 minutes. So that would be 2.5 person hours. And again, if you have multiple people to share that load, that goes by really fast. If that's just one person, then that's a lot more work for that person. I'll say that it says here at least 30 for a nature center or school. That's our recommendation. Again, you can be a nature center and just create a site with only 10 branches, but that recommendation of 30 branches didn't come from nowhere. We here in North Carolina, we have some sites we've been surveying for a while, and in fact, we have 60 survey branches. And what we've done with our data is basically an analysis where we kind of pretend like we did less than we actually did. So out of all those 60 survey branches, let's say we ignore half of them, or we ignore 40 of them and we pretend we only did 20, or we pretend we only did 10. What we can do is we can try to, evaluate, answer some of the questions about, oh, when was the peak caterpillar abundance at my site? And how does the answer to that question vary with how many survey branches I use to answer it? And what we found is that above 30 branches, we pretty much got the same answer. But once we get below that, one of the challenges with working with insects is that they're very patchily distributed in the environment. So you could look at 5 branches and see very little, and it's that 6th branch, suddenly there's all this stuff going on. And so because when there's so much variability, increasing our sample size a bit gives us a little bit more confidence and precision in our estimates of like, okay, I really believe that this is a good estimate of bird food on a particular date. The other piece to emphasize here is that when you make some decision, I want to set up X number of survey branches at my site. The idea is that you're gonna examine, or some group of people collectively will be examining all those branches on the exact same day. So it's not that, oh, on Monday I'll do a couple, and on Tuesday I'll do a couple other ones, and on Wednesday I'll do a couple other ones. We want to get that snapshot of like within that week, on one particular day, I went out and I went through and did all the survey branches at my site. And then ideally do that on a weekly basis. And again, our recommendation is weekly from May through July, but you can do this as long as that you have leaves on the trees. So it's really from leaf out. So here in North Carolina, we could be starting in April and we could go till October. And if you are interested enough to do that, then we encourage it. That's fantastic. If you have kind of limited time and effort, and you can only commit to doing it for a couple of months, this is the key period, because this is the key period when birds are reproducing. And it pretty much doesn't matter where you are in North America. Most birds are reproducing somewhere in this May through July window. And so we want to get a sense of how bird food is varying in that window in particular. Now, if you are tuned in to this webinar because you just heard about this project and you don't run a nature center, you just like bugs and you're interested in doing this yourself, if you have some woody vegetation in your backyard, then great. Set up a site. Again, it's a minimum of 10 survey trees or 10 survey branches, but if you want to do more, you can. And I guess the last piece to talk about, let's see, in terms of setting up a site. Let's see. Well, actually, you know what? Let me pause. The best way to cover some of this stuff is for it to naturally bubble up from questions. So does anybody have any questions at the moment? You feel free to type them in the chat, or to unmute yourself and ask if you like. Nothing yet. Okay. Well, again, feel free to type in there. Okay, that's a good question. So yeah, so typically it will be one branch from one tree. Now, in some situations, so this is actually a useful thing to talk about. It's just how you choose these branches to begin with. And what is up with this stylized cartoon with all the different colors and this very specialized layout. So we want to get a sense of how much bird food there is out there from the representative vegetation in your area or site, whatever we want to call it. And to get representative vegetation, we want to try to select branches in sort of an unbiased way. That said, we're kind of limited because, first of all, we need to go where the branches are. We need to go where there's vegetation. So depending on what the vegetation is in your area, you might have lots of mature trees, maybe these really tall oaks. They don't start branching out until 20 feet up. And obviously, it's going to be very difficult to examine those branches. So you're limited to branches that are kind of at eye level. And often these might be saplings or trees with low branches or shrubs. And so the first step is you want to assess, okay, I feel like I can do 20 branches. I'm going to look at my park or my backyard or whatever and just get a sense. All right, well, there's a bunch of trees over here that have vegetation I can reach, that I can look at. I'm going to just choose one of those branches kind of subjectively or randomly that's in the middle of that area that I know has vegetation. And so that's the first step, is kind of these red trees are kind of chosen subjectively based on what you have to work with. And then the ideal scenario is that these 4 satellite trees around the red one, you're going to kind of just walk in each of the 4 cardinal directions, 5 meters, and then just choose the first tree you come to, or first branch you come to that is at eye level that you can survey. And so by doing that, and it doesn't have to be exactly north and south, whatever, just in general, kind of those kind of forming a diamond or a square around that centrally chosen tree, that's what gives us the representative vegetation. So it's not that we're asking you to specialize on certain tree species or other tree species. And this is a question that often comes up. We want you, again, it's woody vegetation only. So not in gardens and not in, not herbaceous stuff, not in meadows, but woody vegetation. Aside from that, it's whatever this forest type that you're in, or this edge habitat, whatever you're looking at, that's what we want you to survey. I will mention one other question that often comes up, which is about sort of non-native species versus native plant species. And I'd say that all else equal, we're probably interested in data collection on native plant species. And if you're doing this in a natural area, then hopefully most of the plants are non-native. But there are some areas. We have one nature center that has some non-native species on site, and it could even be very intentional on your part that you and the group of people that you're doing this project with are interested in testing this hypothesis, which is fairly well established in some areas, that native vegetation actually supports more bugs than non-native vegetation. That could be a cool project. If that's something that's of interest to you, we have no problem. Certainly, we're not going to stop anyone from choosing non-native plant species. So feel free to do that. But if that's not particularly of interest to you, and you have your choice and you have a bunch of native vegetation around, then we suggest you go with that. Okay, let's see. Let me move on to this is just a more concrete example of what a site layout could look like. This is an example. This is the North Carolina Botanical Garden, where in addition to the display gardens down here, they have a natural forested area with trails. And so this is one of our sites where we have 40 survey branches. So 8 of these red circles, each of these circles representing 5 branches. And we've kind of just distributed them along this little trail loop, so we can kind of walk the loop. And some of these survey circles or groups are separated by maybe 100 meters. And in some cases, maybe it's several hundred meters that separate them. That's in part because we have this large natural area, so we're kind of spreading things out. Especially if you were doing this in your backyard, you might find that these survey circles are they're kind of one right next to the other. And the only thing is you want each of the satellite branches to be closest to the center tree of that is in that circle compared to the closest satellite branch of another group of survey branches. But otherwise, you could certainly, in some scenarios, if it's along the edge of your backyard or something like that, it might not look at all like this layout in a nice, neat, like square around the center. Obviously, it really depends a lot on the vegetation availability. And in some places, that vegetation availability will be very sparse, and you'll just take what you get, and it's fine if they're not arrayed in the way that was displayed in the diagram. Okay, I wanted to just quickly just show you how easy it is to make a site. So I'm going to, so here's our website, caterpillarscount.unc.edu. And if you decide you're interested in this project, first thing you have to do is create an account. But once you've done that, you can, and logged in, you can then use this create new site button. And all you need to know for your new site, you have to give it a name. Obviously, if you're a nature center or you're some official organization, then you probably have that name to use, and you might even have a URL to use. If you're just doing this in your backyard, we just need you to do something more creative than my backyard or home. So this is how this site name is going to show up on the map. And again, people are going to be able to explore this. And it is very unhelpful, actually, if we have 20 Caterpillars Count sites that are all called My Backyard. On the other hand, you probably don't want to call it, you know, Alan Hurlburt, 200 Oak Glen Place, Social Security number, whatever. You don't want to, you may not want to put all kinds of private identifying details in there as well, but you can come up with some creative name for your backyard if you want that will be unique. You can provide a brief description. For example, this is one of our, this is just an example one. Prairie Ridge Eco Station is an outdoor nature center with, you know, prairie, forest, ponds, and a stream, etc. You need to locate your site on a map. So maybe we're somewhere over here in Chapel Hill, and just zoom in as much detail as possible. You have to select how many plants, that is how many survey branches. Again, the minimum is 10, and you can go up in multiples of 5, as high as you like there. There's no stage of this site creation in which permission is required, right? So just to be clear, you create an account, you can create a site. We're not approving you or disapproving you. You have done it yourself. And so again, whatever number of survey branches you think is reasonable. And then the very last thing is you will choose a site password. And the reason we have this site password is basically it's especially designed for nature centers, places where they might have a number of visitors participating in this site. And we want to try to make sure that no faulty data is somehow getting submitted to our site, that it's not easily hacked by Russian bots, because I know we're very high up on their priority list. So this site password that you choose here is different from your individual password. This would be a site password that you could share with your visitors, like at the North Carolina Botanical Garden. We just use NCBG, right? So some easy set of initials or something, but it's very easy to tell the volunteers, oh, you know, we have kind of authorized you to submit data for this site. Here's the site password, and then just confirm that. And then you can you click this button, create site, and you will show up on our map. You can use the app to submit observations and all of that stuff. Oh, the last thing I'll mention, we have a little checkbox. If you are a nature center or a school, if you want to solicit involvement by the public, who might find you from our website, and probably the traffic from our website is not going to be great. But if you do want to be listed, so we have, I can just show you how that would get found. So on our participate page, someone might say, oh, find an existing Caterpillars Count site near you. If you check that box when you create your site, then you will show up in this directory. So they're listed by state, and you would be listed in your little description here, and you'd be listed and you'd be shown on the map. And if you don't check that box, your email won't show up in this table. That's the only difference. Regardless, you will show up on the map as far as data visualization and all of that goes. Okay, questions about site setup so far?
Alan, I responded a little bit in the chat, but just to confirm, if a school has multiple classrooms using a single site, then they can have one password for the whole school, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, so at the university level, so we've done this with 8 or 10, Caterpillar's Count has been integrated into 8 or 10 different university biology classes, mostly in North Carolina. And often, right, you'll choose all these branches on campus and come up with a site password, and then potentially different sections of a class or different classes even can participate and all be contributing. And then, but so they would all need to know that site password. But yes, that works perfectly that way. Okay. Okay, well, let's get to the nitty gritty, I think, of how to actually do these surveys. And actually, we have 2 different methods, and I'm going to walk through both of them. And maybe I'll start. I guess I'll start with a visual survey with my handy branch, survey branch, right here. Now, something maybe we'll show in a little bit. On this branch, I have a little tag. This tag has a unique 3-letter code. So as soon as you create a site, you know what? Let's just go ahead and show that off right now. As soon as I've created a site, I can go into this Manage My Sites page. And let's pick, we'll pick Acadia National Park, because I love that this is being done in a national park. So as soon as you've created a site, on this Manage My Sites page, so here, edit the site, that's just the basic information you filled out when you created it, but you can edit that if you need to later on. But importantly, oops, I'm going to select my site again, Acadia. Importantly, as soon as you create a site, these tags are automatically generated for your site. They're unique to your site. And so you can print this out, cut out each of these little rectangles. And then what I like to do is I use packing tape. So these are designed to fit and be to fold packing tape on both sides of this. That's sort of the cheap way to laminate these things. And then I can hang those from my individual branches. Importantly, you will see that these tags have their plant names in them. When you first create a site, obviously the computer is not magically intuiting what your plant species you're going to choose are. So that's actually another step I should mention, and that's this edit survey plants. So you can do this not just in the website, but with the app in your phone, walking around your site, assuming you have cell service, you can walk around and say, oh yeah, I want, I set up a site to have 4 circles, or that is 20 survey branches. If I click on circle 1 here, I see 5 unique survey codes. And here I can just type in the plant species if I know it. If you don't know it, it's fine to leave it blank. But we encourage people to, over the course of participation in this project, if they're not very good with plant identification yet, that's something that they can work on. And then if you can even get it to genus, I just know it's some kind of beech, it's some kind of maple, it's some kind of hickory, that's tremendously useful. So as soon as you've filled this information in here on the edit the survey plants page, then it'll fill in and you can print those survey tags. Okay, so let me back out. Oops. Oh, right, yes, that is what I wanted to do. If you don't have it already, I think it is helpful to make sure you're in speaker view rather than gallery view on Zoom. So in the top right corner, there's a little view box, just so that I'll be sort of biggest on your screen. But yeah, so with this survey tag, right, with a visual survey, typically what we do to standardize how much of a branch we're actually looking at, is we say, okay, a visual survey includes all the twigs, petioles, stems associated with exactly 50 leaves. And so what I tend to do is actually count out my search area first. And I do that like just a really visual eyeballing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So that's kind of an approximate, okay, 50 leaves takes me up to some visible landmark, like this fork of the branch or something like that. And then I don't have to worry about it. Because otherwise, if I tried to kind of keep track while I was doing the bugs at the same time, I'd be like, okay, leaf 1, leaf 2, leaf 3. Oh, what a cool leaf hopper. And then I forget what leaf count I'm on, right? So that's why I kind of count the leaves out in advance, and then I can just focus on the bugs. And you want to be careful with this visual survey. You want to be very carefully inspecting both the upper and lower surfaces of every leaf in that 50 leaf area. And that's easier, more easily done for certain kinds of trees than for others, which you'll rapidly find. So we have a lot of sweet gum in North Carolina. Those leaves all come out in these big clusters, and you really have to kind of pick each one apart. Whereas if you have a beech or a birch, then it's nice alternate leaves on a stem, and you can like literally just kind of hold the stem and examine 20 leaves on both sides kind of all at once. So that'll vary a bit. But so the key with the visual survey, and I'll get more into what you're recording in a moment, but the key is this very careful examination, both sides of the leaves, and exactly a 50 leaf area. That's in contrast to the beat sheet survey. So here, these are our homemade beat sheets, and we have instructions on the website if you want to make one of these. Our patented, or we should patent our folding design. So basically, we just staple 2 corners of this plain white sheet to this cross frame. The other 2, we made little pockets so we can pull the frame out of the pocket. Oops, where's the? So I can pull that out, and then it folds up nice and easy for my backpack, etc. But so it's like $5 of material. So they're pretty easy to make, but you do have to make them. And if you're working with a suite of volunteers, then you're going to need to ensure they have access to them, etc. So there's pros and cons to the visual and beat sheet. But the way the beat sheet works is you just hold it under the branch, take a stick, an imaginary stick in my case right now, and then 10 hard whacks over the span of 4 or 5 seconds. And then you're looking at what cool stuff has fallen into the beat sheet. I haven't seen the question yet about, who exactly can participate in this project. But it should be a question in some people's minds. And this project certainly can be used with kids, but for the younger the kid, the less the lower our expectations, let's be honest, for their attention span and their attention to detail and their ability to examine exactly 50 leaves and their ability to not miss some cryptic insect that is pretending to be a stem or something like that, right? So for kids, we strongly recommend beat sheets. And that includes even for middle schoolers or high schoolers who potentially have their own phones if they're doing it as part of a school assignment and they're submitting their own data. For elementary school students, of course, we expect there's some adult who has the cell phone who's actually overseeing that data submission. But the beat sheet it's great for sharing and showing off to other people what you found, etc. But it does have that trade-off of, does that mean you need to create 5 or 6 beat sheets for a team of people, or how are you going to share them? The visual survey, you don't need anything. I think I saw the flash of a chat question about switching between methods. And So basically, I think for each person who's considering creating a caterpillar's count site, you need to think about who is going to be doing the data collection, which method is most suitable given your particular trade-offs and constraints. And then once you've picked that method, just stick with that method, right? So the worst case scenario is like, oh, today, flip a coin, it would be fun to do beat sheets. And tomorrow we're going to do, or next week, we're going to do visual surveys. There are slight differences, slight biases that we've described in a published study, actually, about what you're likely to see on a beat sheet versus a visual survey. So for example, flies, as you approach a branch to do a visual survey, you might see some flies that are perched on the leaves. And so because you notice them, they get entered as you're doing that visual survey. When you do a beat sheet survey, as soon as you raise your stick, the fly is gone. And you're focused now on, after you whacked, you're looking in your beat sheet. And so we tend to get many fewer flies in beat sheet surveys compared to visual surveys. We got in our case, lots of click beetles were apparently getting missed on visual surveys. And these are kind of long, skinny brown beetles that just lie along the edge of twigs. We were getting many more of them in our beat sheets than we were in the visual surveys when we were doing this comparison. So there are some differences, and that's fine. As long as we know what kind of survey was being done, we can take those differences into account. But that's why it's important to stick with one method. Are there some other questions, Grace, that have been popping up?
Yes. So how do you recommend replacing caterpillars on the branch once you've caught them in your beat sheet?
Right. It depends on whether it is a one with urticating hairs or not. No. So that's a great question about when you do a beat sheet. We always try to put caterpillars back on the branch that we beat them off of. And they're really the only group that we worry about doing that for. Now, for most caterpillars, some little inchworm or geometrids, there's no problem touching a caterpillar and placing it back. For some, and thank you, Gwen, for fleshing out what urticating means, right? Basically, there are some, like the puss caterpillar, where you touch it and it is bad news, especially if you touch other parts of your body later on. So they can cause a lot of irritation. There's a few caterpillars, some really hairy ones that do that. It irks you, nice. So those ones, I mean, if it's in a beat sheet, a lot of times I will try, rather than handling the caterpillar directly, the caterpillar is in the beat sheet, and I try to just get the leaf. I try to walk the leaf under it so that it walks onto the leaf. That's probably the easiest way. Honestly, for most other bugs we get, beetles, spiders, flies, leafhoppers, most of those are mobile enough that we don't really worry too much. We figure they can find their way back to appropriate habitat. If you'd like to be more to show greater bug welfare, then you certainly can do that. But obviously, a lot of things like leafhoppers or beetles or things will often just jump or fly away from you no matter what, and you figure they can get to where they need to go on their own. What else? Anything else, Grace, in the chat right now?
There's another question about are there any specific bugs that you look for, and do we count every bug that we find?
Yeah, great questions. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Oops. Oh, Grace, can you give me access to sharing my screen?
Yes. Okay, now you should be able to.
Got it. Okay, so that brings me to another. This will help answer those questions about what actually we record when we do a survey. But it also points to a good training resource we have. So on our, it's on the Learn tab of our website. There's this virtual survey game. And so if we full screen that, what that does is it walks us through a series of fake branches. And we start with a really easy branch. And what this game gives you a sense of what the app looks like and what kind of information you're required to submit. So first of all, I'm looking at this branch, and first thing I need to do is find bugs. And oh, guess what? I see some bugs on here. So here, I'm gonna click on this guy, and this is what the app looks like. And so this is the level of detail you need to be able to identify things to. For the most part, it's kind of identifying things to taxonomic order. So you need to be able to recognize that this guy, actually, this is one of those click beetles I was mentioning before, kind of long, brown, and skinny, that we were getting more in the beat sheets than the visual surveys. So I know this is a beetle. You can't see it that well in this picture, but there's a long straight line down the middle of its abdomen where its two wing casings come together. So that's what helps distinguish beetles. So I'm going to say it's a beetle out of that drop down. Next thing I got to do is estimate its length, its head and body length. So I don't care about antennae. If it's a spider or a daddy long legs, I don't care about its legs. It's just from the tip of its abdomen to the tip of its head. And I want to estimate that in millimeters. And here we have kind of a sample ruler up top. So I can just kind of visually compare. I'm going to say that's about 17 millimeters. And of course, we want this information because if you see a tiny bug, well, that represents a lot less bird food than a large bug. So we can take these lengths and ultimately convert them into like bird food biomass later on. So that's it. I had to find it, I had to identify it, and I had to estimate its length. And I'm going to hit save, and it's going to tell me how I did. Look at this. I identified it correctly, and I perfectly estimated its length. Okay, so one bug down. We've got to go to the next one. This is actually a good tricky one. So this guy here happens to be a true bug nymph. This might be one that trips you up. And so this might be a good reason to play this virtual survey game, which is different every time. And I'm going to estimate that length at 8 millimeters and see what it's, oh yes, oh, I'm on a streak here. Sometimes you might see a bug like this guy, and I'm looking down, what's my list of options? Ant, no. Aphid, no. Bee, no. Beetle, da-da-da-da-da. I don't see it. Well, you might come, so we've listed kind of the most common things you'll likely come across when you look at woody vegetation. But there might be some things that aren't in that list. It might be something you know. In this case, I know this is a damselfly, and I see that damselflies aren't listed. So I can click other and do damselfly. Or it might be something, and I'm just not sure what it is. It is totally okay if you are not comfortable on your insect ID. You're not sure whether it's a true bug nymph or a beetle or something. Then just call it unidentified. If you call it unidentified, you can still estimate its length, and you can jot a little note. You can even take a photo. And that's actually a piece that's not part of our virtual survey game. I'm gonna call this a true bug and call it 4 millimeters just to see. Look, we don't always get it right. And we were looking for this, and my length was way off. And now I feel like I've got all the bugs in this branch, so I'm done. I can go to the next one. It tells me how I'm doing so far. And then the branches get a little bit harder. Visually, they get a little bit trickier. And you really gotta kind of search. And so, oh, there's all the those bugs I missed. And the last one, there's lots of kind of visual distraction here. So anyway, so this is good practice for finding things, cryptic things, doing a visual survey, but also getting a feel for estimating length, and for practicing identifying arthropods. But I guess the piece I was just mentioning was that if you see something that you don't know, or if you just see something on your branch that's really cool, like a caterpillar, then with the app, you can take a photo and submit that photo as part of the data record. Any photos you submit with the Caterpillars Count app will automatically get sent to iNaturalist. And for those of you who don't know, iNaturalist is another citizen science platform. Again, that's one where there are taxonomic experts who are examining, combing through all of these photos that get submitted. And maybe someone will not only confirm that, yes, that beetle you submitted really is a beetle, but they'll even identify what species of beetle it is for you. And if someone does that on iNaturalist, you will get an email and you'll get notification, you'll get follow-up. The other thing that iNaturalist integration does is it gives you a sense of how you're doing. And so to the extent that you submit photos of your observations, you'll get a weekly email anytime anyone on iNaturalist has identified or confirmed or maybe disagreed with your observation, your identification. So you'll know, oh shoot, I keep mistaking, true bugs for beetles or something like that. This will help you learn. Okay, let me go back to sharing my screen here. And I'm going to go show just a few more details about the app. Let's see here. Right, so you'll enter, when you first log in, you'll actually enter that 3-digit code that distinguishes what branch you're at. And as soon as you type EJR, it'll automatically pop up, oh, you're at whatever, the example site. In the first circle, you're at an American beech tree, aren't you, right? And so you can make sure that you typed in the code correctly. The very first time you use your app, you have to type in that site password, and that just confirms that you have permission to submit data for this site. After that, you'll never see the site password box again. Your phone will remember that you have access. You specify whether you're doing a visual or beat sheet survey, have any general notes there. And then if you saw arthropods, you'll see that same drop down we just saw with the virtual survey game. And if you see multiple of the same thing, then you'll say, oh, I saw 4 ants that were each 3 millimeters long versus just 1 ant that was 10 millimeters long, right? And you can, as you're doing the survey, you can increment these numbers by tapping the little arrow. Arrow up will increase the count from 4 to 5, for example. And so after you've finished, you've covered the whole branch, then you provide a little bit of information about the branch itself. Now, this plant species information this automatically populates. That is, once you've figured out what trees you're using for your survey branches and you entered that, this is not editable. This sugar maple thing here won't be editable. It'll just pop up automatically and show you, oh yeah, you're at a sugar maple. If you did a beat sheet survey, then what you need to do is enter how many leaves, roughly, to the nearest 10, were poised above your beat sheet when you whacked it. And so usually after I'm done with the beat sheet survey, I've put the caterpillar back, I've shaken out all the other bugs, I'll hold my beat sheet back under that branch again, and then do a really quick count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, about 60, 50, 80, right? So again, to the nearest 10 is fine. But how many leaves were really being sampled by that beat sheet? Now, if you're doing a visual survey, this number of leaves box will not be editable. It will be, it'll say 50 leaves because that's the protocol. We expect that you examined 50 leaves. We also ask you to estimate how long is the leaf length on average of those 50 leaves that you looked at. That can allow us later on to kind of estimate total leaf area that you that you surveyed, and it might help us distinguish, one tree species which has really tiny leaves. Maybe you only surveyed 50 tiny leaves on this branch and 50 huge leaves on this other branch. We might want to do some corrections later on in our analysis for that. And then the last piece of information is what we call an herbivory score. And herbivory is really how munched are these leaves. Maybe there were no bugs on the branch, but there's lots of leaf holes, which would be signs that bugs have been there before. And so we have these different categories of herbivory. And so the categories range from no herbivory at all to really heavy, more than 25% of leaf area on average across the whole set of leaves you looked at are munched. And I can tell you just firsthand experience that most of the branches you'll come across will probably end up being traced. There'll be some leaf holes. You're not like right now, if I go out in North Carolina, the leaves are just emerging, so I might see a bunch of branches that don't have any herbivory yet. But as you get into the season, most will have at least a little bit. The real question for you will be, how do you decide between trace herbivory and light herbivory? And the way to think about that is you got to kind of do some mental gymnastics in your head, but the cutoff really is 5%. Is it more or less than 5% herbivory? Well, imagine you just looked at 50 leaves. 5% of 50 leaves is 2.5 leaves. So now, if in your mind, you take all of those leaf holes, which are scattered across your survey branch, and you smush them together, do you have more than 2.5 leaves worth of holes? And if you do, that bumps you up into the next category. If you don't, as will often be the case, that keeps you in that trace category. And then you can kind of do the same mental gymnastics, right? Oh, do I get all the way up into moderate? Well, that means I need more than 5 leaves worth of leaf holes. So you'll select that category and you'll hit finish, and that gets submitted. Okay, so right, here's the advertisement for the virtual survey game. You can play as much as you like. We also have another arthropod identification quiz where you just get practice identifying and not in the context of the surveys. That's linked on the website as well. Let me stop and pause again and see what other questions about the actual survey method have popped up. Is there anything else? Nothing at the moment. All right, I will keep going here. I really rely on people's questions, because if you just rely on me and my brain, I forget to tell you important things. And that's why in these webinars, people always are like, what about this? What about that? And I'm like, oh yeah. So Noah's asking how to download the app. And so it's available both for Android phones and also for iPhones and iPads. So you have to just go either to the Apple Store or the Android App Store, the Google Play Store, I guess. But either one of those if you search for Caterpillar's Count. Okay, let me get into the data visualization tools then and some of the other resources. And then we can kind of have a free-for-all. So I still need to share my screen again. Where are we doing? There we go. Okay, so in terms of data visualizations, okay, right, here's our website. If you go to Explore, there we have a Maps and Graphs page. And at the top of this Maps and Graphs page, for fun, for fun at the top, we just have a site leaderboard. And by default, it kind of ranks sites based on what fraction of survey branches or what fraction of surveys that were ever done at that site had caterpillars. And so here you can see some of our top sites. Some of our top sites have kind of a small sample size, so maybe they're getting undue credit. But what you can see, and we can expand this leaderboard. I mean, this leaderboard is just for fun, right? It's like, how do I compare to some other sites? What you can see, though, is that these sites, it drops off this percent of surveys with caterpillars. I would say that in most cases, if you are getting 10% of your surveys with a caterpillar, you're doing pretty well. And so that's also something to think about when you decide, well, how many survey branches do I want to set up at my site? The more survey branches you have, the greater chances of seeing cool stuff. So yes, there's obviously a trade-off with how much time you have to spend. But that's also part of the reason that we suggest, especially nature centers, do 30 branches or more. Something else I haven't addressed, I guess, is clearly we are asking you to submit observations of all kinds of bugs, and yet we're called Caterpillars Count. This is Bug Bowl, and we do want to kind of embrace the diversity of all these cool bugs and insects and things like that. That said, so we could have called this project Bugs on Bushes or something. That said, from the bird perspective, from the songbird perspective, if you need to grow tiny little chicks into full-sized adult birds as quickly as possible, then caterpillars really do hold kind of a special place on the menu. Just being these soft, juicy bags of protein, basically. Almost all of that caterpillar is just going to get converted into bird growth tissue, compared to, say, like a beetle, which has all these hard parts, which are just going to get pooped out later, or in some cases coughed up later, or something like that. So that's kind of the one reason that we highlighted the importance of caterpillars, is that we can, they do hold this special place, especially with respect to our bird food related questions. Okay, but I digress. And anyway, this is more just for fun more than anything else. And all these zeros right now are just because, well, no one has started. As far as I know, there have been no caterpillar count surveys submitted yet in 2021. You could be the first. Set up your site today, do a survey tomorrow. You could be the first on this leaderboard if we sort by this week or year. But anyway, that's the main part of the data visualization stuff. The first part of it really is the map. So this map gives you a sense of where we have caterpillars count sites. And actually, let's see here. So we actually just got some sites created in Alaska and central Alberta. Data haven't been submitted from there yet. You can see that we have by far the highest participation out east, but we welcome participation from anywhere, and basically anywhere that has woody vegetation to sample. Now this map is currently, actually, this green shading is actually displaying information. It's displaying that same information that was in the leaderboard. What percent of surveys at a site have had caterpillars? And so there's not a really clean, obvious pattern. You can see a lot of these sites. Oh, wow, 0%, 6.2%, 6.67%. So like I said, if you're getting 10%, you're doing really well, right? It's not a really clean pattern, but part of understanding these really broad scale patterns, we don't know a lot. So a lot of this is new, and that's part of the excitement of participating in this project, is you're contributing data and information that helps us explore these broad scale patterns where we don't really have good intuition. But while this map at the moment is showing caterpillars, we can click on this map filter button and we can change that to some other group, any other group we want, right? So maybe we want to know more about spiders, and we want to know not just spiders, but we want to know big spiders, spiders that are at least 15 millimeters in length or something, right? We can specify, oh, I just want to compare visual surveys or just beat sheet surveys, etc. So we can zero in to just a particular year range, or just a particular month. Whatever filters we want to do here, we can apply those filters, and we'll get a new visualization on the map. So a different shading should be. Let's see what it looks like. So whoa, this is like 3 hot spots for big spiders. And of course, this is probably a really low sample size for these large spiders. I don't know why I put that filter in. Importantly, whatever visualization you do on this map, if you're, for example, if this is part of a class, you can download the data underlying these points. So you would get a list of the sites, and then a list of the actual values that are being displayed here. So you can do analysis, you could do statistics on it if you wanted to. Okay, so the map is really great for comparing across sites, but a lot of you, if you create a site, you might really be interested in exploring the data you submitted for your site in particular. So I'm just going to zoom in here to the North Carolina Botanical Garden, and basically anyone can click on any site on that map, and you'll get sort of a detailed dive into what's known about what's going on at that site. So first we get just a general summary. This is one of our long-standing sites, so we have done over 8,000 surveys there. We've documented almost 16,000 arthropods, the majority of which were not this high-value food item of caterpillars. So we've seen over 600 caterpillars there out of 16,000 arthropods. Again, for fun, we have just a leaderboard of who has done the most or seen the most caterpillars or whatever. Again, we can, by default, it's showing you 2021, for which there's nothing. But here we can see Grace, who's managing the chat, is sitting at number 3, where I am way down here at number 8. So I need to go find some caterpillars immediately. But in terms of the data, so here is a look at our most recent year of caterpillar phenology. So this graph, this is our phenology, or our seasonal timing graph. And it's showing from, I guess, late April into late July, what this looks like, caterpillars at the Botanical Garden in 2020. Now, importantly, you have the ability to add up to 10 or 12 lines for comparison's sake. So for example, I could add on caterpillars from 2019 to this graph as well. And that helps illustrate how 2020 was not just a crappy year for humans. It was a crappy year for caterpillars too. And it wasn't just the Botanical Garden where this is true, actually. I could show you, or now you know how to show for yourself. We had a number of sites, for example, even up in Massachusetts, where they were seeing many fewer caterpillars in 2020 compared to what they'd seen in previous years. So this tool we can use to visualize, multiple years. We can see, oh, look at this. The timing of that caterpillar peak also seems to differ from year to year. So in 2018, the peak was much later in early July compared to 2019, et cetera. So we can kind of play with this. We can add on other kinds of arthropods if we want. Oops, I added 2021, there's no data. 2020, say. We had a lot more spiders than we did caterpillars, and that's generally going to be the case. And there's some up and down. Is that noise? Is that some real climate signal going on? Who knows? But this is how you can visualize. And again, you can visualize this for data you collect yourself, but you can visualize this for any of the sites in Caterpillars Count. And you could compare your site to another site, et cetera. The other visualization we have is what kinds of bugs are you seeing, and how do they make up the overall sort of arthropod community? So here we have this major breakdown of, again, at the Botanical Garden, the biggest component of this bar are the aphids, and that's because there was just this one branch, actually, this one survey branch of beech that had these beech blight aphids. There are these white fuzzy guys with tails. I call them the boogie woogie aphids because when you blow on this branch with 500 of these guys, they all start waving their their little tails around in unison, and it looks like the whole branch is moving. But doing the boogie woogie. But you could imagine, actually, so we could break out this composition to ask, well, how do the kinds of bugs we see, how does that vary with the types of tree species that we're surveying? So we can break this down by tree species, and we see, oh yeah, I mentioned that all those aphids, sorry, were on the beach, and so that shows up here, and this as this big gray bar. Sorry, I keep obscuring it when I try to point it out. The big gray blob for American beech compared to how many aphids we tend to see on all these other tree species. And we can also compare, again, we could compare from year to year. So 2018 was actually the year where we really had that beech blight branch. And in other years, like last year, we didn't have a beech aphid in our survey. So we can see how it breaks down by year, et cetera. Again, so the data underlying these composition graphs or the phenology graphs, you can download them. So if you wanted to do more stuff with it, graph it in your own software, if you're savvy about those kinds of things, export it somewhere else for a class project to do data analysis, you can do all of that. And along those lines of data availability, so these are kind of synthesized, right? Like underlying this data point is maybe 40 or even 80 survey branches worth of information that have all been boiled down to, okay, on average, out of those 80 survey branches that were done, 42.5% of them had a spider or something. But if you want the raw data that you're submitting, you know, survey branch X had these 3 bugs, survey branch Y had those bugs, etc. All of that raw data is also freely available. So all of the data submitted to this project is available to anyone for any purpose under a Creative Commons 0 license. You can download everything. You can download just the data for your site, just the data for some other site, you know, for what's going on in Acadia National Park in Maine, or what's going on in 2020. You can do that on our data download page. So again, really great, I think, for inquiry-based learning assignments and things like that, for, you know, actually asking scientific questions of these data, if that's of interest to you. Questions about the data visualization stuff? Okay.
There are some questions in the chat about surveying generally, if you want to take those now or wait.
Yeah, sure. Now that's good. So let's see. Time of day being one of them. And the most important thing about time of day, so time of day can impact, you know, which kinds of insects are active. The most important thing is trying to be consistent. So again, thinking about thinking about who's going to be doing these surveys. Are you having to coordinate a group of volunteers, or is it just you? If you're coordinating a group of volunteers, maybe there's some set schedule that you're kind of constrained by. If it's just you, then it's your own schedule you're constrained by. You want to pick a time to do these surveys that you can more or less stick to whenever you do them. And consistency is the most important thing, more important than trying to do morning or trying to do afternoon. As for surveying during rain, that's a good question. So I would say no, it's probably not worth doing a survey if it's raining. And in fact, you might even note that we actually have in the app, there's even a checkbox you can check if, let's say, it just rained, there was a big storm last night, and you're going out in the morning and trying to do surveys, and you notice that it's not raining right now, but the leaves are all wet. You can check a box to indicate that. Yeah, we don't survey during the rain just because we know it's going to be a biased, sort of underrepresented sense of what insects would otherwise be active. And so in some cases that might mean you skip a week because that was your survey day and it rained that day. In some cases, maybe you have the flexibility to just survey. You were going to survey that day, it rained, so instead you're able to survey the next day. If you can do that, then that's great. If you can't and you skip a week, that's fine too. Surveying at night, not for caterpillars count, but Noah, you should get yourself a black light if you don't already have one, and you should get out there at night and see what you can find, because there are some caterpillars that totally glow in a black light and it's amazing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And some caterpillars actually only come out at night because they're trying to avoid getting eaten by birds, which are active during the day. So, you know, when we do these surveys during the day, we see what's active and available for birds, but there's a lot more bugs that you know, might be active in the nighttime. Other things, you know, things that you might hear like crickets and katydids and things like that.
Okay.
So surveying at night is a whole other ball game, and so it's not suitable for this project. But if you're interested, you should definitely get out and look around at night.
Just on the time question, so is there a best time, or are all times equal if you're free?
I would say morning, probably, you know, but so yeah, so we at our sites, we usually do everything between 8 and 10 or 8 and 11. But that's a good question. Cicadas are a good question too. I mean, depending on where you are, you might have a gazillion, which would be awesome. And but they certainly count. Oh, you know, that's something. So I'm remembering questions that people have asked in the past about what we actually count. So basically, yeah, if it's on your branch, you count it as long as it's alive. It is. So we don't tend to count. So we don't count. Like you might come across a dead bug on a branch, or you might. Oh, and actually, Grace, sorry, cicadas are leafhoppers. They're in the Okanarinka, so they're in leafhoppers, treehoppers, cicadas. But as long as it's not a molt, not a dead insect, we don't tend to record pupae, but there are some interesting caterpillars, for example, that form a case around themselves, and that's, you know, we will count those, even though they might be hard to get at for certain birds. But yeah, absolutely, the brood X or brood 10 cicadas are going to be huge, and a lot of birds that don't normally eat cicadas are going to be like, well, can't resist. Let's see. Noah asked, we count bugs that we see on the ground. So Noah, this really is it's branch based. So you're either going to just inspect those 50 leaves of the branch, or beat the branch and see what you get in your beat sheet. But if you notice something cool on the tree trunk of the tree branch that you're surveying, or that's just outside of your 50 leaf area or something, you know, by all means, you know, submit it to iNaturalist or something if it's really cool, but don't include it, because we're trying to get that standardized estimate of what we find. Okay, let's see, where else was I going here?
There was one more question I think that might have gotten lost in the chat about recording weather data at all. Do we do that?
We don't record weather data. In an earlier version of the app, it was something we asked you to do, like estimate the temperature, etc. But there's no real need for us to, do that, because if we know, you're going to create a site, and so you're going to drop a pin on a map. So we have your latitude and longitude. And we can, with knowing the latitude and longitude and what day you did a survey, we can basically extract the climate, the temperature data. The one thing we don't know is like if there was a really localized rainstorm that might have impacted what you found. And that's why we have that wet leaves checkbox. But otherwise, we don't ask for it. But it's a good question, because we very much are interested in relating patterns of these bugs to climate data. We just don't need you to supply the climate data. We can get that on our own. Okay, we just have a last couple of minutes. So I just wanted to highlight resources, to kind of give you really a broad level overview of some of the resources that are available here. And you can find these, I guess it's under participate. We have our resources page. So a lot of the stuff I've talked about, we have various guides for practicing your identification to order for these common groups that you would find on woody vegetation, tips for training participants. So some things you can print out in addition to the survey game and the online ID quiz that you can do. We also have data sheets. If you wanted to do this on a paper data sheet because you don't have a mobile device, or you just prefer to write stuff down and submit it on our website later, you can do that. We have instructions for building a beat sheet. You could practice the app on a test branch here, just so you are familiar with it before you go out in the field. We have just some, how you use some of the tools, the data visualization tools and things like that. And then we have these lesson plans and activities, again, especially for formal education settings. Some of these are really, we've come up with a couple of them up at the top here. The rest are just related in some way because they're related to climate change or insects or arthropods. And so we've kind of gathered a bunch that might be related to this project here. And let's see, the last piece feels like this should be better integrated. So those things are linked here, but also for people like Noah, who are really into bugs maybe, and want to do not just caterpillars count, but other things that are complementary to caterpillars count. There's just a list of potential side projects you could get involved in. So for example, you could try rearing out caterpillars, ideally not caterpillars from your survey branches, but if you find other caterpillars, you try to rear them out. You could do an explicit comparison of beat sheets to visual surveys, do mothing blacklights, put out clay caterpillars, etc. So we have lots of ideas here if you are interested in kind of building on caterpillars count and making it kind of an even more expansive set of activities for people to do. So let me stop there. I'm happy. We're kind of at the end of the hour and a half, so I recognize people will probably need to go, but I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that any of you may have. And I'll also send out an email. So we have this recorded, and I will try to get this up on YouTube at some point and share the link so you can kind of revisit it. There's already recordings from previous webinars up if you wanted to rewatch this. But yeah, for those of you who are considering, creating a site, then just think about how many people would be doing it with you. How many survey branches do you have? Some good woody vegetation nearby. And then as you go through the steps on the website, if you run into questions, you can feel free to email me. The email address is just caterpillarscount@gmail.com. And you can find all that contact info as well as a frequently asked questions page on the website.